Right, so welcome to the first ever, which will hopefully be a lot more professional from now on, first session of the Ner Tamid initiative. Just to let you know that we are here to help people who didn't start off from and have become from, and sometimes there are all sorts of challenges which are absolutely unique to you along the way. And I've been speaking to lots of my ex-students today who outlined plenty of those, but you probably know exactly what those are in your own journey. So we, as all the rabbis who signed up, who incidentally is every single rabbi in Rebbetzin I've spoken to, who may have been responsible in some minor part, played some minor part in your journey at the beginning, want to be with you along the way. So there is going to be every 2 weeks a live video webcast, which is webinar, which is whether it's going to be in multiple forums like this one or just in Zoom. We will finesse that later on. You're able to ask questions. We will try to get those questions answered. We also have a web page, which always needs tweaking as well, but we're going to be doing that. We're setting up groups, or encouraging groups, you to set up groups within your own community of other people who've made the same journey as you and who might benefit enormously from an interchange of experience and solutions to problems that come along the way. All the rabbis and rebbetzins that I have recruited have signed up to broadcast, to answer questions, and also when they are traveling around the world, once your group is established, I'll be encouraging them to come and address your group as well, so you can have a face-to-face with these people. Somebody's already suggested to me we could consider maybe even doing a Shabbaton and getting some of those rabbis, and you could, as it were, having a whole Shabbos experience, but that's a little bit down the line, and I haven't discussed it with my partner, who's over there. You can see the good-looking guy called Yosef. But let's move to the topic, which came from the first group that's been set up as part of the Ner Tamid initiative. So shout out to Houston, Texas. And they wanted to know, what should you do in your journey or at the beginning of your journey if you signed up to the very, very crucial Jewish idea of aseh lecha rab, get for yourself a rabbi? Does that mean to say that you have to do absolutely everything that he and his wife tells you to do, advises you to do? What if your gut, what if your basic instinct tells you that this is the wrong advice for you and the wrong advice for your child, etc.? How do you reconcile this essential ingredient of connecting with the rabbi and letting him and his wife guide you, a mentor figure, with, at which point are you retreated so much from you that, as it were, there's no you left? And maybe that leaves you a little bit worried about, without me in charge of the ship, how do I know what direction it's going? So that's what I'd like to address now, this very short, we're going to do half an hour, and then if there's any questions, the people can write in questions as well. Remember, I should have said right at the beginning, the absolute signature move of this initiative is that people can sign in anonymously. I can understand that you might want to ask a question that comes from your own experience, your husband's or wife's experience, your children's experience, or your experience with them, or they you, that might just be a tiny bit embarrassing. So you don't have to, when you sign into the web page, you can become part of these broadcasts without having your picture appear or your name appear. Or you could give yourself a nickname, Super Frummer from New York, something along those lines. Let's address this issue. When I lecture all over the world, and I have been doing that for about 30 years, I think I need 30 years. Gosh, that makes me feel extraordinarily old. In fact, even longer. I'm not going to say that. But when I've lectured all over the world, I say that there's only two things I really teach. And one of them is this crucial Jewish teaching of aseh lecha rab, get for yourself a teacher, a rabbi. It does say rabbi, and can I point out it's in the masculine, aseh lecha rab. That means to say that it's talking to a man. If it's talking to a woman, it's say aseh loch. And maybe there's a very important truth there. A woman will hear advice and get advice better from another woman, because women will understand women's issues and situations and perspectives much better than a man will. So maybe there's a dualism going on there. Make sure you get a rabbi, make sure you get a rebbetzin, and ideally get a pair, because very often you're a pair going to them if you're a mother and a father, a husband and a wife dealing with a family problem. But certainly as an individual, a woman would be better with a woman and a man would be better with a man. So I think it's absolutely crucial to get hold of a rabbi. And I don't think in any area of life that you have succeeded in, that you have done so, if you succeeded well, unless you had a teacher. I play the guitar, for example, profoundly badly. And the reason is because I taught myself, so I don't hold it properly. If I'd had a teacher, they would have been able to say to me, that's not the way to hold it. And I, being me, would have said, why not? And they would have said, because, and showed me why. You can get better stretches of your fingers to cover more strings and frets to make better and more complicated chords if you hold it the right way. I would say. Anything you do well, you do best when you have a teacher, somebody who's learned the experiences that you're trying and the knowledge that you're trying to gain by learning from him or from her. It's no different when it comes to getting a rabbi. But it's essential you get the right teacher. I mean, if I got this message when I was a young man, I said, right, I need a teacher for the guitar. And I looked through the yellow pages, we used to have yellow pages, and find a violin teacher. Wrong choice. You need a guitar teacher to teach you the guitar, and you need a brain surgeon to teach you how to become a brain surgeon. And I suppose you would have to sign up with NASA if you want to go to space. Don't choose the wrong rabbi. That's very crucial. Let me expand on that a little bit because I think it is very, very important. Project Seed. There's a famous name in the world of Kira Verhauken. Started in America, came to England. Apparently, much to my own surprise, I led the first seed project, or so Project Seed says, in England. And it was to a small town. The idea was to take a bunch of yeshiva guys and their summer vacation, 2 weeks, they would dedicate to teaching people in a small town like Auchinploch or Glenhughie in Scotland. And then people could join and discover their whole Jewish identity. As a consequence, in the UK, a lot of people from small towns, Glasgow, my hometown, Edinburgh, smaller towns in Brighton and stuff in England, they moved. They committed to being religiously Jews, realized that the infrastructure of the town that they lived in could not provide them what they needed, and moved. So a whole bunch of people, I think 60 families had moved at one stage to Manchester in England. And I remember there was a beautiful cheer. Well, I think it was a beautiful cheer. I gave a cheer, but it was a beautiful day is what I'm trying to say, in a garden in Manchester, one of these rare sunny days, an English summer's day. They have one of those a year. And at the end of the presentation, I can actually still remember the cheer I gave. At the end of this presentation, it was question time, and somebody said the following question. They had a child, a little boy, and they wanted their son, remember their Balik Shuba, they wanted their son to learn to play the violin. They had taken the question to their rabbi. Now, I know their rabbi. Their rabbi is a huge Talmud Chacham, much, much greater as a rabbi in knowledge, etc., than I am. And they said that they thought they wanted to play the violin, and the rabbi frowned. Now, the rabbi was an FFB rabbi, very frum, very, very frum, and an unbroken line all the way back to Mount Sinai. So he frowned and he said, why would you want him to play the violin? And so they explained that it would be an extra interest to him and something to conquer. And why would you want him to play the violin? And so they tried to explain again. And, he just did not get it. And so they brought the question to me. Now, it's never my style to contradict what a rabbi, and particularly somebody's rabbi, has said. I don't think that's a healthy thing. And you've probably known from your own life experience, the more advice you get, the more confused you become. However, I did decide to break my rule on that occasion. I said, what I think, having heard your story, is that you need to get a new rabbi. And that hurt me to say, because I really do respect and like this man and know that he knows more than me. But he didn't get Bali Teshuvah. He just didn't get it. Why would he want to play the violin? Gosh, non-Jewish. They needed somebody who got them. So the most important thing is to get a rabbi. Absolutely. And the Talmud says if your rabbi tells you your right hand is your left hand and your left hand is your right hand, you should believe him. I was very close to my rabbi, the Getzed Rov, for a quarter of a century. If he told me, my right hand is my left hand, I would, yeah, lovely. I'd want to believe him. I wouldn't believe him. Why did the rabbis use that analogy? They could have said, if your rabbi tells you black is white and white is black, or tall is small and small is tall, or fat is thin and thin is fat. Why did they choose that one? So something called Rasimcha Wasserman said, if your rabbi is telling you that your right hand is your left hand and your left hand is your right hand, you know what he's telling you? Turn around, you're going in the wrong direction. If I turn around in my chair, which is, of course, a swivel chair, particularly for this analogy, then my right hand is now where my left hand was. In other words, you have to find somebody you're able to invest enough trust in that if he tells you to turn around 180 degrees, that you're going in the opposite direction, you're willing to buy into that, to trust him enough that that's the right advice for you. But I think the phrase is "wake up and smell the coffee." There are different rabbis for different things, just like there are different doctors for different conditions. Having moved to the United States, I'm astonished that my MD, who's a lovely fellow, whenever I go and see him, he sends me to another doctor. So what's the point of an MD? He wants to send me to an eye specialist. He wants to send me to an ear and throat specialist, or a vein specialist, or whatever it is, or heart specialist. In the good old UK, the doctor does everything, which is probably why we've got a higher mortality rate. But quite seriously, there are rabbis who specialize in areas, just like there are doctors that specialize in areas, and there are lawyers who specialize in the areas. You wouldn't go and seek criminal advice from a lawyer who deals with tax law. He doesn't. It's not his area of speciality. If you are a Baal or Baalas Teshuva, you have to make sure that this great piece of advice, which I honestly believe will guarantee your success, is coming from the guy who is in your field, who gets you and can give the right advice. And then at that point, you should be willing, and it's worthwhile being willing to listen seriously to what he has to say. And incidentally, don't make the mistake of thinking because this rabbi gave you, or gave somebody who you know certain advice, he's going to give the same advice to you. Advice very much depends on the person that you're dealing with, but that's just common sense, I suppose. So it's absolutely essential to get somebody who knows you. So I'll tell you a story. Rabbis always tell stories, but it's a true story. And as this is being recorded, I'm about to hang up my hat as a rabbi because I'll be expelled from the brotherhood. But this is a true story about a fellow and his wife. They were Bali Tshuva. The fellow had been married previously to a non-Jewish lady, and they'd had a child. And so they had decided that they wanted to bring up their child when he came to visit them as a Jew, but he was not halakhically Jewish. They were struggling at the time to have a child. So that they thought was a good idea. They went to speak to one of the great, maybe I better not even mention the name, but one of the famous tzaddikim, one of the real saints of the generation who I was fortunate enough to be close to. But truly, if I mention his name, you would know everybody in the world in that generation, even today, if you mention this name, a truly holy man. And he was. And he said, you're making a mistake. You should not try and make a non-Jewish child into a Jew. He's not. And anyway, he said, halakhically, he's not your child. You should really have nothing to do with him. This fellow and his wife came to me crying their eyes out. This was like being hit in the head with a baseball bat. And I said, I'm giving you rabbinic permission to ignore what he told you. I could see, and probably you could see immediately, that statement was just way, way beyond their ability to listen to it. Did you ever read that book, The Bamboo Cradle? There's a story in The Bamboo Cradle. It's an interesting story, and I knew the gentleman involved. A character, I think we could say. But there's a story in it when his Chinese baby daughter that they had adopted and converted, when she got to be bas mitzvah, a young lady, it suddenly struck him that as halachically he's not her father, could he be alone in the house with her? And then another thought struck him. Apparently they were a very cuddly family. Schwarzbaum, what they were called, weren't they? And they were always hugging each other. So can I hug this young lady who's my daughter, and I love as my daughter, when technically I could marry her? So he went to see his rabbi. And the rabbi said, in actual fact, some people, for some authorities, it's an issue. For other authorities, they're lenient, like Rav Moshe Feinstein. But you should know anyway that even in the established Haredi world, that when your daughter becomes a young woman and starts to grow as a young woman, physical contact, even between a natural father, a biological father, and a daughter, it diminishes. I can tell you that from my own experience with my daughters, and indeed my granddaughters. I'm a very cuddly person. We were a cuddly family. But as my granddaughters, as soon as they start the first transformation, signs of transformation from being a girl to a young woman, that's already when we back off. But the point of the story, and the reason I'm telling you this, is because it struck him. He said, wait a minute, he said, you knew this all the time. You knew this when I first came to you. Why didn't you tell me way back 6 years ago, whenever it was? And the rabbi said, because you weren't able to hear it then. And this was very wise. You aren't able to hear it. This is not patronizing, by the way, or insulting. This applies to me as it applies to anybody else. When I go for advice to a rabbi, then they are assessing my ability to hear the answer that will fit. But there may be other answers, but he's saying that, but he's not ready for that. I think that applies to all of us. That was the story. The crucial part of the story for me in the Schwarzbaum story was you weren't ready for that. And I think in these two stories I told you about the violin and the great tzaddik who said, ignore this child, your biological child, he's not your child. I told him to ignore that. Incidentally, I did check out with this great tzaddik son-in-law, and he said, no, you said the right thing. Sometimes Zaidi, he said, is in such a high level, he doesn't understand how other people might not be able to understand what he's telling them or get what they're telling him. That's the point. Make sure the rabbi who tells you is the one who gets you. Who speaks to you and gives you advice is the one who gets you. So let's go back to the question. So suppose, let's be blunt, you are a Baal Tshuva or a Ger, or one of you are, and you want to get your child into the local extremely frum school, the Haredi school. I think this is a problem, incidentally, which applies in the Haredi world, much more than it would in the modern Orthodox world. And somehow or other, there is no place for your child. And they've got all sorts of excuses under the sun, but you're not an idiot, and you realize it's because you are a ger, or you're the daughter of a ger, or etc., etc. We all know about this sort of stuff. Now, a rabbi who is sympathetic and experienced dealing with Bali Tshuva, he'll be able to sympathize with you and probably work out a strategy for you to either find a better school, because this is probably not the school for you anyway, as a consequence of their own prejudice. Why send your kid to a school where they're not really going to be fully accepted? Or work out a way to twist the school's arm. Another story, incidentally, Rabbi Solomon, the mashgiach of Lakewood Yeshiva, I'm very close to and have been since he spoke at my wedding to my first wife, and that goes back, when I was 21, so that's 40-something years ago. He twice, or maybe 3 times, banned the schools in Lakewood from starting the term, which is exactly this time of year. I was staying with them once when this happened, because there were 6 girls who didn't have a place to go. Six girls for whom no school would open their door. And their crime, one of them had a father who was please, I hope you're sitting down, a Sephardi Baal Teshuva. Boom, boom. I mean, Sephardi and a Baal Teshuva? Could it be worse? Scottish and a Baal Teshuva, that would be really bad. But I mean, you get the idea. So there are big people out there, and Ramatzia is one of them, who gets the situation of a Baal Teshuva. But he'll be able to give you the advice that's good for you, and you have to be willing to accept it. Another point, then maybe I'll start pausing, and maybe if you want to send any, if I can see them here, any messages, and I'll try and answer them. Another very important point is a rabbi, at the end of the day, no matter how great, is a human being. Did that sound right? Is a human being. No matter how great, is a human being. And the verse famously says, in tzaddik ba'oretz, there's no such thing as a tzaddik in the world, she'asa tov v'lo yechta, who doesn't get it wrong sometimes. And sometimes you can go and speak to a rabbi, and maybe even your rabbi, and he's just not there for you, or not there enough for you. Because he's a human being, he might be struggling with his own big issues. Don't forget, human beings have their own problems. We expect a rabbi to be instantly available to us and our issue at that time, even if he's not. If we're not members of the shul and we don't pay a penny towards the salary, he's got to be there for us. For us, that's unfair. He might be struggling with his own big issues, much bigger than our. Of course, if I've got a problem, I want to see my rabbi, it's the biggest issue in the world. But it's crucially essential to make sure that you've got the right rabbi. Now, at that point, if the right rabbi says to you something which doesn't make any sense to you, should you still listen to him? My argument, frankly, would be yes, because my own experience with my rabbi over 30-something years is when he told me to do things, which he told me many times to do things, which struck me as wrong, or rather made no sense to me. But I did them anyway because I had faith in my rabbi, and incidentally, he was always right. But that was a rabbi who was for me, So I was learning Gateshead Yeshiva at the time. It was the Rabbi of Gateshead, and he simply seemed to get me perfectly. And I really did look upon him as a father. But sometimes your father tells you to do something and it doesn't make sense to you, but you know that he loves you because he's your dad. Sometimes it's the right medicine to take, even though it's bitter to swallow. And I think that was the model applied. If we are, all of us, in a situation of transition and moving into a world, well, I've just done that myself. I just became an American citizen 3 or 4 weeks ago. There's still different ways of doing things in America than there were back in the UK. And even though I speak the language fluently, it doesn't matter. Different ways of doing things. If you're moving into a society, to a large degree, you have to accommodate their way of doing things, which is not your way of doing things. But if the rabbi gives you bad advice or advice that you just can't take, don't worry about that. That doesn't not make him your rabbi. My rabbi, or one of my rabbis, from Matthew Solomon, who I mentioned before, once told me to do something with regards to one of my kids, and I could not do it. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. As a consequence, I didn't go back to see him for about 6 months. I was too embarrassed. When I went back to see him, I had told him with that embarrassment that what happened, and I couldn't look him in the face. And he said to me, Reb Yehuda Yaina. Incidentally, people don't know that I actually have a name. YY stands for Yehuda Yaina. Reb Yehuda Yaina. We've known each other and loved each other for a very long time. Let's just move on. In other words, he got the fact that I couldn't deal with the advice that he gave me at the time. Okay, fine. Maybe he was saying, maybe I miscalculated, or maybe, no problem, maybe I could have done it, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I don't know. It doesn't interrupt your relationship with your rabbi simply because you weren't able to, in all occasions, think it's the best thing. You can go back and explain to him, he's not going to break his heart. You didn't listen to me. I tell you when to scratch your ear. No, that's not how it works. You can say, look, I know you've told me to do this, but it's really hurting. Well, what would you do? The Rambam compares rabbis to be spiritual doctors and medical doctors. They make the comparison between the two. If you went back to your doctor because he gave you a drug or he gave you some medication that isn't working or isn't working for you, let's say he gave you an antidepressant and the antidepressant is not working, there are other antidepressants. There are different approaches. But unless let him know that didn't work for you, then he can't change his approach because he wants to give you the best thing that works for you. There's no reason why you can't go back, you and your wife, or you and your husband, or you with your kids, or whatever it is, and say, look, you gave us that, we couldn't do it, or we tried it didn't work, and let him try again. And maybe just like all good rabbis, he might say, well, this is above my pay grade, and simply refer you to somebody who's much greater and better than he is. So I think that's basically how it works. No, you don't have to resign your individuality, resign your authority over your family, over your spouse. Authority over your spouse is wrong, but you get the idea. Your participation in the decision-making of your spouse, or your life, because you've got a rabbi. But you want to be guided. I don't, I suppose, have to resign my authority over learning to play the guitar because I've got a teacher, but you'd be an idiot not to learn the basics and really the more refined bits that you're not going to teach learn yourself from that teacher. So I think the same thing works here. No, you still maintain your individuality. And if the rabbi tells you, look, like all of us who are parents, sometimes we know that it hurts our kids when we can't give them what they want at that time. But how many times in your life, and certainly in my life, have I said, or have we said, at the time I thought it was the worst thing that could have happened, but now, sometimes there's a perspective that comes later, like that rabbi said to Professor Schwartzbaum, I didn't give you the advice then because you couldn't hear it then. That's not an insult. We're all on a journey. And to try and give, a baby's in a journey as soon as it's born. The mother puts the baby to her breast and starts to feed the baby. All the baby can have is the milk from its mother. Then as the baby proceeds, then, remember that stage when you take a foray into his first solid, usually a mashed up banana, most of which ends up in his head. But you're dancing around excitement. And then, potatoes and meat and all this. That comes much later. This is a process of life, right? And only an idiot would try and feed a piece of steak to a newborn baby. You kill the baby, it'll choke. Well, that's the truth for all of us. If I went to my Rav and I've got a Rav, everybody needs a Rav. After my Rav passed away, I desperately sought an alternative because you need that input in your life. Somebody will turn around and say, no, that's the wrong decision, or this is the right decision. When to stop, when to move forward. You need somebody to give you that input, but don't try and do too much. Don't try and take on too much, or don't take on a rabbi who will load you with too much, more than you're able to carry. Right, so what we would like to do is to get tons of feedback. This is being recorded so that the people who didn't, because of our hiccups at the beginning, maybe get to see this live, but we'll be able to craft what we're doing to be able to make Ner Tamid absolutely a perfect fit for your need, because that's what we wanted to do, by the sort of questions we get when we're able to hear the sort of things that are troubling you. So this is the whole big rabbi thing. I should have said that everybody likes to hate rabbis. It's interesting that this is the week's Sedra called Shoftim, which deals with rabbis. And Rashi says, it's only a fool who turns around and says, oh, the previous rabbis, they were real. No rabbis today. Absolute garbage. There is no app you can get called Dead Rabbis, right? Hashtag Dead Rabbis. No, the rabbis of your generation, the rabbis got sent for our generation, but still the responsibility is to find the ones in that generation who specialize in our subjects. We would like to hear from you exactly what you've thought of this topic. We'd like to see your experiences so that we can have an ongoing conversation. You and hopefully groups will start mushrooming all around the world who are seeing and are part of this initiative, so that people can get together and discuss this and then come back as a group perhaps to the various, it's not just me, to the various other rabbis and rebbes who are party to this, so that you can hear other voices as well. So thank you very much for allowing us to launch. Thanks for being right in there at the very beginning. I'm confident this is going to become extremely huge, numbers-wise and hopefully impact-wise. We want you to know, as I said at the beginning, those of us who may have been responsible in some minor part to helping you make the life choices that led you to the lifestyle that you've taken on, we want you to know that we're still here with you. We probably let you go too soon. We probably assumed everything was going to be really great out there. Experience has shown that that's not always the case, but we want you to know we're still there with you, and we'll try and help you overcome them. Sorry, there's a voice speaking to me, which is nice, but I can't hear it. Whoever's speaking, can you try it again? There's a chat. There's a chat at the bottom. Hold on. Ding. Yes. Hi. What advice can you give to find out? Okay. What advice? This is to Dave. Hi, Dave. How are you? What advice can you give on how to find the right rabbi for you, and how do you know you found the right one? Ah, good. I'm so glad you asked that. Well, suppose, I'll give you an example. Suppose you, God forbid, had a problem with your, let's make it minor, teeth, and you wanted to find the best dentist. Well, how would you find the best dentist? Then you would simply ask around, and it would be, particularly if, let's say, you had a problem with your molar. I chose this example. You got a problem with your molar, so what you do is you ask somebody else, is it a problem with a molar? Who did you find in the area? I live in the 5 towns in Long Island. Who's the best molar guy? And if I went, and that actually, I would gather information. I want to find out from lots of people, because Jews love second opinions. But you would narrow it down. Rabbi, Dr. Rubinstein, he is the best molar man in Long Island. And then I go to him, and now, how do you know he's the right one for you? Did it work? So if you treated your molar perfectly, and it was really good, and you had a lovely chemistry with the guy, chemistry? Sounds like a joke. And whether it was an extraction or whatever he did for you, it worked out perfectly, and he didn't bankrupt you in the process. Then you probably come to the conclusion he's the right guy for you anyway. No different than a rabbi. You've got a problem, let's say, with a teenage son, and you're a Baal Tshuva, let's say. I'm assuming you're a Baal Tshuva, maybe not. Ger, whatever. So here you've got a problem which is unique to you because you've got a fight with your teenage son who's just turned around and said, but I'm only doing to you what you did to your parents. Woo! Now that's the sort of challenge that the rebellious kid from the FFB home isn't able to say. They can say it to you, and that hurts. Is there a good answer for that? And at that stage, what you do is you find the rabbi, like the dentist, who's the specialist in our world, in the Kiruv Chakim world. And then you want the one who's the specialist in the Kiruv Chakim world, who's very good, has a good reputation of dealing with teenage children, because that's a big challenging issue. And then when you found 2 or 3 people who've had kids with problems like yours that were solved by Rabbi Cohen, Rabbi Levy, whoever it was, then you take your problem to them. Now, of course, you're going to tell me that how do you get to them? How do you get into them? Look, if God forbid it wasn't a tooth, but let's say it was something seriously, suppose it's serious, more serious, you had a kid with, God forbid, a very serious disease. You are a Jewish parent, yes? Then you would keep up the tradition of Jewish parents. You would make it your business, whether you had to camp outside his front door in his lawn to make sure he sees you. Well, the most important program and reality of your life is your life. And challenge of your life is your life. You owe it to yourself to get the very best help to make a successful life. And the very best rabbi. Yeah, the very best rabbis are the busiest. That's hopefully why this initiative will be spreading around. All the best rabbis, all the specialists, if you like, in the Kiruv world will all hopefully be very experienced from those people who did keep in touch with them, or they kept in touch with them, with these sorts of questions. And then you'll simply go to the ones that got the reputation as being expert in your problem and never take no for an answer. You write to them, you phone them, whatever it is, until they try and you make them your rabbi, at least for this issue. Dave, are you getting that? Is that okay? Eleanor, thank you very much for your nice note. That was very sweet. I'm glad you found that good. Lovely, Dave. Thanks very much. Yes, awesome. Awesome. Dave's American like me. Good. So I think we'll sign off on this one. The next one will be the third Thursday of the month. That'll be the 26th. It's going to be a Rebbitzin. I've got two Rebbitzins who are trying to commit to this at the moment. One from the very early generation of Kiruv Rebbitzins. I won't mention her name in case she can't make it, but she's signed up to do at least one of these. Another from, I'd say, the middle generation. That's my own generation. And we're obviously going to have younger rabbis and rebbitzins from the current generation so that we touch everybody's needs as we produce these webinars. So thank you all very, very much for allowing us to launch. And it's loch and broch and everything you do. Bye.